Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspirational show coming right up. Our first guest today is Julia-Turshen, and she's here today to talk to us about her new book, Feed the Resistance. Now, Julia is the author of Feed the Resistance and Small Victories, named one of the best cookbooks of fall 2016 by the New York Times. She has co-authored numerous cookbooks and has contributed to the New York Times, Vogue, Tea Magazine, Bon Appetit, Food and Wine, Self, The Washington Post, and The Wall Street Journal. So let's welcome to the show, Julia.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it is such a pleasure to have you here. And gosh, what an amazing book. I have to ask you, gosh, what inspired you to write this book?
Sure, yeah. I think the inspiration was pretty much just the most recent presidential election and all of the sort of feelings and energy and momentum that came out of it. And, I thought a lot about what can I do? What can I contribute to this conversation? What can I do that would be productive and positive? And what do I already know how to do? And how can I combine those? So I thought, as a cookbook author, I could put together a book that, would give people tons of ideas, not just things to cook, but really ways to get involved and to think deeply about, what we are cooking. And I thought it would be even better to ask, over 20 of the sort of smartest or most capable people I know the same sorts of questions. So, yeah, the book has contributions from many, and all the proceeds go to the ACLU. So it's nice to, have an opportunity to work on a project that, everyone who buys it already just just purchasing it, you'd sort of protect civil liberties. So that works for me.
Well, it's a win-win, and I love the title of your book, Feed the Resistance. I mean, how clever is that? And it has such a dynamic soul and feel to it.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, and it's we ended up making it quite small. The book is really it's not quite pocket size. It's a little bit bigger than that, but it's this really sort of small, adorable book, and I just love the idea of putting that feeling into something that you could really carry around with you. So I've been describing it as like a little book that, contains a whole lot.
Well, and so it kind of leads me to my next question, because a lot of people are probably thinking, a book that's got great recipes, how can this be a platform for activism,
Sure, yeah. It's definitely something I've been getting asked a lot, and I think the answer is quite simple. I think both food and activism are about people, sort of end of story. They have so much in common, and there's so many ways to use food as kind of an entry point to activism. And, it's important to understand that activism means something different to everyone. To me, just personally, it means being involved in the community I live in and invested in making it a safe and supportive place for not just me and my family, but everyone who lives here.
Well, and I'm glad you touched on that, because, kind of think again, it's like, how can food impact our communities? I mean, I know it's a place where we all come together and we're able to share, but in what other ways do you see it impacting, just not our neighbors, but our community as a whole?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's just as you said. It's food offers us this chance to connect. There's no better way to better understand someone than to go over to their house to eat, or to invite someone over to your home. And I think in addition to that, which is in itself quite powerful, every single decision we make about food is actually a political one, and I think often we don't even realize it. But, even if we're just buying groceries, if we're getting ingredients, we have to think about where those ingredients come from, like what's the larger food system they're a part of, how are we part of that system as a consumer. When we go out to eat, if we're not cooking, who's running the restaurant? Are they someone who looks like us or not? What was their experience in getting funding for that restaurant? What are they able to charge for items on their menu, et cetera, et cetera. So, as consumers, we have a lot of power, and together, collectively, as communities, we have even more. And food is this thing that brings us together in such powerful and evocative and even just really simple ways. And it's also, an area where we have a lot of, power to sort of affect change.
When you were doing your research for this book and kind of bringing together all these fabulous recipes, what's one that really stood out in your mind as, it may be hard to pick a favorite because it'd be like trying to pick a favorite child, but one that really kind of stood out in your mind, like, gosh, I really like this one a lot,
Sure, yeah. So the book, has recipes and essays, and as I mentioned, over 20 people contributed. So I got to learn so much in putting this book together, especially from everyone's incredible contributions. And picking a favorite is very difficult. But the one that just came to mind when you're asking me the question is it's towards the end of the book. They're chocolate espresso bars, and it was a recipe given to me by the baker Cheryl Day, who's wonderful. She's just a wonderful person, first of all, and a wonderful baker. And she's a great author. She has Back in the Day Bakery in Savannah, Georgia, and she runs it with her husband. They've written some really incredible, best-selling cookbooks, sort of baking books. And that recipe comes to mind not only because it's delicious, they're really decadent, wonderful bars. It's like a shortband kind of type of crust with like this chocolate filling that has a bit of espresso in it, and they're so good. But they come to mind because when I reached out to Cheryl about wanting her to be part of the book, and did she have a recipe in mind, and telling her what I wanted this book to be and what it kind of stands for, and the story behind the recipe is just as sort of moving to me as the recipe itself. And Cheryl, and she writes about this in the introduction to the recipe, she was inspired by a woman named Georgia Gilmore who ran something called the Club from Nowhere. And this was during the Montgomery bus boycotts, and Georgia organized this group of, it was all women who cooked and baked. Many of them did that for their, professions. And they sold all the food to sort of help feed the people who were boycotting. But they also used the profits from those sales to fund just some of the sort of logistics that came with the boycott. So, things like gasoline and, tires for the cars that were, moving people around, people who, were no longer taking the buses. And I think, to me, the story is so powerful because I think it really speaks to the legacy of food and the, in the fight for civil rights and, the history of resistance. And it shows how food offers us such practical ways to get involved and support our communities. And, when there's good food, people also show up. So, so that
got that right.
That recipe definitely is, feel like very important and evocative, and I think stands for so much of what's in the book.
Yeah. Well, and I know you talk about, about coming together around food. How is peace really kept with, being able to do that as well, being able to kind of keep the peace and come together as a group?
Sure. I mean, it's an interesting question. I think sometimes, our homes, our kitchen tables, our dining room tables, these spaces where we eat, I think something that is important to me is, knowing that sometimes those safe spaces, how important it is to keep them safe so that maybe sometimes, you're not fully keeping the peace, creating a place where it's okay to disagree, where we feel safe to be, perhaps uncomfortable, to confront, some hard truths and things like that. So, that's what sort of immediately came to mind. And, but I think always making sure that, we do whatever we can to establish that feeling of sort of safety and security, because I think that's when real change can really happen. It's really easy to talk to people who you agree with. It's a lot harder to do the opposite, but I think it's so important to, connect with people who don't all, have the same backgrounds or think the same way, and meeting together over a meal is a really just sort of, I think just, I hesitate to say easy because it's not easy. There's hard work in those kinds of conversations, but it's an easy access point to those conversations.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's so much going on in the world right now, and it seems that things are very polarized. So we do need more opportunities and ideas, and your book is just here at the right time to be able to offer some, different insight in how we can go ahead and come together as a whole.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I'm really glad that came through. And I think, one story that I heard about recently, it's not in the book, but it's very just powerful, I believe. And I heard about it first through the New York Times. And there's a young man named Derek Black who was born into a white nationalist family, and sort of, followed his family's beliefs, I don't think without ever questioning them. And he, they had, I believe his father was a Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, like really deeply involved in that community. And Derek Black shifted his views, and he renounced his white nationalism, and he credits a college classmate who invited him to a Shabbat dinner for really helping him to begin that shift. And that story has stayed with me so much since I heard it, because I think it just really speaks so clearly about the power of, what can happen over a meal. I think, that's where we get to have in-person conversations, and, that's something that we're definitely losing in this day and age of email and social media and all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, I like sharing that story because I think it just is such a clear example of what can be accomplished at the dinner table.
I'm so glad you did share that, because, it does. It's interesting when people come together at a dinner or at a meal, or, a lot of times the guards let down. They're able to kind of have open discussion where maybe they weren't really able to before.
Absolutely. I think food, really grounds us. And I think, you think about what it's like to sit at a meeting, if it's at work or school or whatever, a bunch of people sitting around a table, and how serious and that can feel and how uncomfortable it can feel. And then you think about, if you put food on that table and it becomes a meal, and how much more relaxed that feels. And, when we break bread together, we become more human with each other.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and, it's interesting because also in your book you talk about how food can help us heal, which I think is so powerful.
Absolutely. There's an amazing essay from Jordan Lexton, who runs this very incredible program called Drive Change that's based in New York. And Jordan's background was that Jordan worked at Rikers Island Prison, and I believe in the high school that's part of the prison, and saw so many students, be released from the prison, and then without too much time passing, would come back into the system. And Jordan's eyes were very open to, the just huge issue of recidivism, of people, being released from prison and, not being given the, the resources to succeed in the world outside of the criminal justice system. So Jordan started this program called Drive Change, which is, it's a food truck kind of social justice project, and they run this food truck and they serve amazing food that's like award-winning, and it's completely employed by and staffed by folks who are coming out of the criminal justice system, and mostly young people, and they're getting incredible job training, and but also just such a strong and empowered community. And Jordan just received this gigantic grant to really scale the work they're doing. And so when I'm so inspired by Jordan's work and Drive Change's work. And so when I turned to Jordan and asked for an essay for the book, I was like, it'd be great if you could talk about how food can end recidivism. And Jordan was like, well, as long as criminal justice system exists in the way it does, like, that's not going to end, but I can tell you about how food can help us heal. And Jordan's essay is it's short but very direct and very powerful, and just gives so many tangible examples of the work that they're doing, and just the potential food has to really help us heal and move forward, and move forward while also acknowledging things that have happened.
Oh gosh, what a powerful story. And and it really does just take one person seeing something, going, gosh, this is where we can go ahead and where I can make an impact, and he's doing all these great things. And a lot of the other essays that you have as well are just so profound. What are some of the ways that we can reach out and be more involved?
Sure. It's a great question, because I think so much about sort of the resistance and activism and, community involvement really just does come down to reaching out and showing up. So at the back of the book, there's a section of sort of lists and resources, including 20 places to reach out to. And these are places you can reach out to if you need help, if you need resources, or, places you can offer help and resources if you have them to give. So, everything from on the local level, from local places of worship to, your local first responders and food pantries, domestic violence shelters, reaching out, obviously, if you need help for any of those things, but also reaching out to find out how you can support the work they're already doing. And then the list goes on to sort of state and national groups and, large groups like the ACLU, which, the book supports, and other similar groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center and Planned Parenthood. And, I think a big thing I learned in putting together this book is that when it comes to getting involved, there's plenty of people who have been involved for a very long time and who are working really, really hard. And, you don't have to invent something new, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I think just showing up and finding out what you can do to support work that's already happening is often the most helpful thing that you can do, that we can do. Well,
and is that what you mean by practical activism? Because
sure,
you talk about that in your book, and people might go, well, what the heck is that,
Yeah, so that is the title of the essay that begins the book, and that essay was written by a writer who I just deeply respect named Mickey Halpin. And Mickey had written a version of this essay that appeared online probably about a year ago, and I was so struck by that and everything that Mickey outlined in the essay that I asked Mickey to, if we could use it in the book, and what the result is something that is just so useful. And the sort of subtitle of the essay, under practical activism, is if you want to do something, don't try to do everything. And Mickey goes
that could
on
be
to,
a problem, right?
Yeah, no, and Mickey goes on to explain that, being involved in activism is like being involved in anything else that's sort of pretty major. Like it's it requires a lot of stamina, and I think figuring out ways you can be involved in the long run, ways you can be involved and be committed to things without getting burned out, so that you that you just abandon the work altogether. So Mickey advises following something you can be a leader on, something you can be a follower on, and something you can make a habit of. And the answers for that, are different for each individual. But, a habit could be, making sure you vote in every election.
Oh my
God. That is something
an easy habit, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Well, and you look at things like that, and that kind of a habit of making sure you vote every election. I mean, that's where responsibility starts, is, where you can start making changes. And a lot of times people think, well, my vote really doesn't matter. It's, it's just me. And it's such a huge thing.
Absolutely. And I think it's such an important thing to unpack and understand, because I think that sense of feeling sort of defeated, what does my vote count on one person? Think about what would happen if every single person, felt that way, or, felt that way and gave in to that feeling. Nothing would happen. And it's so important for us all to, take responsibility for everything we can, and to also acknowledge the privilege we have in just being able to vote, and, help others who, perhaps maybe you have a neighbor who, wants to vote but has, a young kid at home and can't step out. Maybe, offer to some child care for however long it takes them to go vote, or, give someone a ride, or, there's really practical ways we can all help each other.
Mm-hmm. It could be something as simple as just letting your neighbors know. Like in my area, they moved where you can drop off your ballots. And so it's like in a totally different area, and maybe it's just letting your neighbors know, hey, this is where the new ballot drop-off is, because
Exactly.
I think people can get really defeated by some of that,
Yeah, and it's, it takes, it can take a lot for some people to show up, and I think making sure that, any questions they might have, making sure that they already have the answers to them is really helpful. And I think demystifying things that can feel intimidating, whether it's, if someone's voting for the first time or registering to vote for the first time, just helping out wherever you can.
Mm-hmm. You initially we're talking about, if you want to do something, don't do everything. I think that's what a lot of people do. It's like, I care about all these different things, and so I want to jump into them all, but they do take so much time and energy just to give yourself to one. It could be like helping the homeless or whatever the case is. There's so much going on,
Absolutely, and I think a few things. I think one, remembering that all of the kind of work we're talking about as, it's multi-generational work, and it's, it's a marathon. It's not a series of sprints, and I think figuring out ways that you can be involved, with that in mind. And I think just for me personally, the way I've incorporated this work into my life is making sure it ties to things that I enjoy doing, and being more involved in my community. It's not like it's adding on to my day as much as it's giving me so much. The work I do as a volunteer where I live has introduced me to neighbors I wouldn't have known, and helped me form relationships that mean so much to me. And most of the work I do is through food, because that's what I love to do. I'm at my happiest when I'm cooking. So if it means, part of my week I spend cooking for people who don't have access to, good quality food, it means I'm getting to cook, which I love doing. So, it's easy to be involved in things that you enjoy doing, and then you look forward to them. And, it's this wonderful kind of full circle thing where, you're helping to take care of people in your community, but you're also taking care of yourself and providing yourself with something that, is a positive experience. And I think there can be a little bit of like a misconception that, getting involved or becoming more active means, just adding something on your to-do list, and it can feel like a burden. And I think if it feels that way, you're not adding the right thing. I think you have to find the right fit.
Yeah, something that really empowers you. Maybe it's, helping children after school with homework or whatever the case is.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's, there's such a spectrum of ways to get involved. Like if you're, a graphic designer, maybe the way you get involved is designing, posters or invitations for a local organization. Or, if you're a musician, maybe you volunteer to play at, in my community, we have this time of year, there's lots of 5Ks that happen that raise money for groups. And the last one I went to, there was this great band playing, and, everyone was having sort of more fun because the band was there. So maybe you're the band,
Or maybe you're the person handing out water if you're not running the 5K.
Exactly.
Yeah, they need everyone in every degree. And, and it kind of brings me to my next question. I know in your book you talk a little bit about, random acts of kindness to do for other people, and so what would be some things that we could involve ourselves in? It kind of goes along what we've been talking about already.
Sure, yeah. I think, the sort of lists at the end of the book include, one great list is, 10 things you can do that take less than 10 minutes. And one of them is, doing a random act of kindness without expecting something in return, and just doing something kind just for the sake of doing something kind. And, that can literally be anything. I have a friend who just was telling me the story of being at an airport the other day and checking in, to her flight and getting her boarding pass. And she was at a big international airport and noticed someone who was trying to check in their flight who I think it was in New York, and that individual didn't speak English and was really confused. And so my friend took out her phone and went online to a translation app and, helped this person check in to their flight and, made sure they weren't confused and lost. And, I think we've all experienced feeling, not sure what we're supposed to do or where we are.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's a really hard feeling, and helping to alleviate that feeling and just being a human being to another human being it's a great thing to do.
Yeah, and, it feeds both people. I mean, it just kind of feeds your soul and, helps them also get on their way. And,
exactly.
And everyone leaves with this feeling like, gosh, I just feel a little bit better today.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think if we, if everyone did that every day, and plenty of people do, and I think if we continue to, I'm a big believer that a lot of small things add up to big changes.
Oh, yeah, I would agree with you on that, too. I mean, it's interesting. It could be as simple as opening a door for somebody or, just helping people along your journey where you're not, and where you're really not expecting anything. Because I think a lot of times you hear people talk about paying it forward, like there's a level of expectation that they'll get something later, where I think, random acts of kindness really kind of put it in perspective. That it's like, hey, you're just doing this out of the goodness of your heart.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, what final thoughts do you have for our listeners? I mean, I cannot wait to dive into these recipes. I've already kind of earmarked a few of them, like, I'm going to be trying this pretty soon. I mean, you've got so many great recipes here. I don't even know where to start. I mean, I've been eyeing, you've got several I've been eyeing. I can't even pick one.
Well, that's a good kind of problem to have, for sure. I guess, I guess the final thought I would say kind of, in regards to that is that I'm just so excited about everyone who contributes something to the book, and everyone contributed something that means something to them, and I really, I hope that everyone who picks up the book is gets to meet all of these wonderful people and learn their stories and read the story behind the recipes and read the essays and, hopefully cook some of the delicious food and really understand what it means to the people who provided the recipes. And that's definitely a hope, because they're all really inspiring and doing wonderful work. And I think in purchasing the book, you definitely, your world gets a little bit bigger.
Well, we can definitely use that, especially at a time like now, where it sometimes seems that either we're so disconnected or so divided. We really do need to be able to have, your wonderful book and feel like we can come to the table and feed our resistance,
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, and so, Julia, where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community?
Sure, yeah. I am probably online. I'm most active on Instagram, and my handle is just my last name, which is Turshen, so it's Turshen. It's the same on Twitter, and my website, which has information about, I'm doing some book tour events and stuff. So all of that is over on julia-turshen.com, because it's great to get to meet people in person, too.
Well, I'm so glad that we had this opportunity to meet you and talk about your amazing book, Feed the Resistance. I highly suggest everyone pick up their own copy. I've been looking at this cauliflower that you have on this recipe.
Yeah,
I'm like,
that's really good. I hope you enjoy it.
It's not your grandma's cauliflower, we'll put it that way. Well, maybe your grandma, I don't know, but I mean, you're a good cat.
Not mine, but I wish it was.
Well, Julia, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure to speak with you about it all.
Oh, thank you. We're going to pause here for a quick break, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
Have you ever had the sense that your thoughts might actually be doing something? Ancient secrets of manifesting have been masterfully revealed in the award-winning book Manifesting 1-2-3 by Ken Elliott. For the first time, the author's experiences and stories in this book describe exactly how your thoughts can create anything. You've been doing this all your life, but it's never been fully explained for you until now. Visit manifesting123.com for more information today. Manifesting123.com.
Do you know that you can become a genius at any age? Do you know that you can change your life and create a brilliant life for yourself? Hi, I am Olympia LaPointe, an award-winning rocket scientist who you more than likely have seen on TED Talks, Impact Theory, and PBS. Check out my latest book, Answers Unleashed, The Science of Unleashing Your Brain's Power. Simply go to answersunleashed.com books and check it out for yourself. You'll find the tools to help you create the life you've always wanted.
The highly acclaimed and newly released book, The Hand Part 2 by Lynn Van Praag Grattan, describes the journey between a psychic medium and a family who lost a son. Messages from Beyond Eternity's Gate is of love and healing. For more information, visit www.lynnvanpraag-grattan.com. That's www.lynnvanpraag-grattan.com.
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted to be introducing our next guest, Dr. Anthony Paustian, and he's here today to talk to us about his new book, A 250,000 Steps. Now, Dr. Anthony holds a PhD in educational psychology and a graduate degree in business administration and design. With decades of experience in strategic leadership, he has a broad understanding of what actually works in daily practice. From his Air Force days on a fighter aircraft to becoming a corporate leader building and positioning national brands, Dr. Anthony has been given an uncommon opportunity to design and build a technology-focused college campus from scratch. So let's welcome to the show, Dr. Anthony.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
It's such a pleasure to have you here. As soon as I heard about your book coming out, I had to have you on the show.
Well, I appreciate it. I mean, I love talking about my book, believe me. It's always a fun thing for me.
Well, and I love to start with the beginning because I'm always so curious what inspires people to follow the path that they're in. So how did you come to develop this book?
Well, over the years, I've been a leader in a lot of different contexts, and everything from my Air Force days to the private sector to an educational sector, and I've learned a lot of lessons along the way, and I just wanted to impart those lessons in a way that people can understand, a very practical how-to approach to certain types of issues. But primarily, I'm passionate about inspiring people. My number one passion in life is to try to inspire people to become the best version of themselves. And I will tell you that because being in higher education for a long time, I saw lots of young people who had really no idea what they're going to do. They were just kind of muddling their way through school and just were not very inspired and not very passionate about anything. And I'm looking at them thinking, wow, these are our next leaders, these are our next politicians, our next corporate leaders, our next everything. And they just are just kind of just blah. And so I'm all about trying to inspire people to go push themselves to the next level, to find that which they are passionate about, and then whatever it takes to basically work towards those passions. Because I'm a believer very strongly that if you are doing that every day, which you are passionate about, you will never work a day in your life. And if more people were doing that, we'd have a better world and a better country. So that's my inspiration. So when I wrote this book, I thought, well, maybe I should do what I'm passionate about. And having been a former Air Force guy, I've always been passionate about space program. I grew up watching the Apollo program, and that was always very fascinating to me. And, of course, I wanted to be an astronaut as a kid, so I went in the Air Force. And then obviously did not happen. I was too tall. That's part of the problem. But over the years, I've gotten to know a half a dozen of the Apollo astronauts who went to the moon and back. And I've had numerous conversations with them over the years, just tons and tons of them. And I thought, wow, we're losing some of this history here. People are just, every year that goes by is one more year removed from it, and people are just starting to forget about it. And I'll tell you, what we did in that 8-year span is nothing short of miraculous, especially in the 60s. So, and there are a lot of awesome lessons that came out of that. So it's like, I got to apply these lessons to today. And so I took lots and lots of notes from our conversations and our lunches and our dinners, and I wrote all that stuff down, and I started taking my leadership philosophy, and I just basically intertwined it with the lessons learned from the Apollo program, and that's when the book came out, A 250,000 Steps.
Well, and gosh, we need more people that can be that innovative today. That can be that creative today. And you talk about that in your book. You talk about creativity being the new currency. So why is that?
Well, because there's a lack of it. In fact, there was a study done some time ago, a couple of different studies. One out of the College of William & Mary, and basically it was looking at the creativity quotient, whereas IQs over time have gone up, and intelligence quotients have gone up in people, which makes sense because people who spend a lot of time gaming or working out, doing things with technology, operating their lives through their smartphones or whatever, they're able to do things. They're able to understand how things work. And that's where the intelligence quotient comes in. The creativity quotient, the CQ, is a different measure, and it measures one's creative ability. And those numbers over a 50-year span have been going down, progressively going down in this country. So IQs have been going up, so people are smart, but they're not very creative. That combined with a study that was done a few years ago where basically they went to over 1,200 CEOs and companies all over the United States saying, what is the most important trait that you need people to have coming in to work for you? And creativity was by far overwhelmingly the number one thing, which implies there's less and less of it. And so those two things combined, it's like, well, if you want to be competitive in the job market today, you better learn how to become creative. And just so you know, I define creativity very simply. For me, creativity is not art. It's not music. It's not the things we often think of as creative endeavors. Creativity to me is nothing more than taking two things that already exist and stuffing them together, jamming them together, connecting them for the first time. That's all it is. And so when Fred Smith started FedEx, he basically had connected in his head the Federal Reserve System and how it cleared checks back in that day with the transportation, shipping, logistics business, and said, you know what? Why can't we ship packages the same way the same way they clear checks to the clearinghouses for the Fed? And that's when he wrote a paper in graduate school. Didn't do well, but he wrote a paper on it, and then later on and used that premise to start FedEx. And, of course, at that time, overnight shipping never existed. 3 days was your best. And now everybody in the world copies them and uses their premise. So that's creativity, taking things that already are out there. And honestly, Marianne, I'm telling you, I believe everything is already out there. Everything that exists is already there. We haven't discovered a new natural element in our society since 1939, and that was francium. Every other element on the periodic table that's been added since was a combination of existing elements. So there's nothing new. It's just a matter of just taking things that already exist and connecting them in new ways.
Yeah, connecting the dots. Well, and so you talk about creativity. How is that different than imagination?
Well, they're related, but they're not the same thing. People often confuse them. Creativity is making connections. And innovation is actually applying those connections. So, and people often confuse those words too. Innovation and creativity are not the same thing either. Some of the most creative people are not very innovative, whereas some of the most innovative people are not very creative necessarily. Creativity is like creating those new things by connecting things, and innovation is someone taking those things and finding a practical application for their use. So, oftentimes, like during the 70s, whereas a lot of creativity is done in the United States, creating new technologies. it was the Japanese in the 70s that took those technologies and actually did something with them and created whole new markets for them. That they were the ones being innovative with them. Imagination is like a current. It's like the river that flows beneath all of it. Imagination is your ability to think in the abstract, where you can see things in your mind's eye and picture them. So as you're being creative and you're connecting things, you can, in your mind, visualize what that connection looks like. How after you've connected these two things, you can see it before it exists, and you can picture it in your head, and then you can even elaborate on that and say, okay, so if I do this and I connect this, and then if I apply it or use it in this way, and I do this, and you can visually, mentally see all these things. That's imagination, and that is used. That tool, the imaginative thinking, is used in all aspects of life, but especially in the areas of creativity and innovation.
Well, and you touched on this a little bit in our discussion. You talked about the space program. So how does that foster innovation?
Okay, so during the 60s, when JFK in 1961 said we're gonna land a man on the moon by the end of the decade, mm-hmm. So right out of the box they're down to about 8.5 years. At that time, at best estimates is there were only about 20% of the available technology at that time to do the job. They had to invent and create all of it, but for the most part, at least 80% of it. And what people don't realize today is, in the massive effort to do that project, that there are over 6,000, literally thousands and thousands of products and services that we take for granted every day in our life today that came as a direct result of the Apollo program in the 60s. And the economic impact, for example, the return on investment. People always bemoan about how government spends lots and lots of money, but the return isn't there. And they're right. More often than not, government wastes a lot of money. Government spends money in areas that they'll never see a positive return on investment for. But in the Apollo program in the 60s, there are many, many, many economists in this country who have looked at that over the years and said that based on what it generated and what we're using today, a conservative estimate would be about a 15-to-1 return on investment. So for every dollar they spent, they got 15 back. I'm telling you, Marianne, if you find an investment like that for me today, I am all in on it. So
I think we both are.
Is pretty awesome. Yeah. So, and the space program in general, even including the space shuttle years and all that since then, the entire space program, they say yields about a 7 to 8 to 1 return on investment. But that 8 years in the 60s, it was 15 to 1, and people worked in total harmony and unison. One of the things that I hear a lot about in companies today is, a lack of, esprit de corps, a lack of collegiality, or a lack of teamwork. People are always frustrated. There are work problems when it comes to morale. It's common, and I deal with it all the time when I consult with companies and I speak to them. That didn't exist in the Apollo program. Everybody had the same goal. There's a kind of some urban legend, because it's never been factually proven by anybody, but it's been talked about a ton. And it was talked about even in the media back in the 60s. So there might be some truth to it. I can't prove it, but it does make sense because everybody I've talked to in the Apollo program, even people from Mission Control and everything else, they all say this is how it was then. Everybody was on the same page. Even the custodian. There's a story that John F. Kennedy was touring NASA facilities, and there was a custodian working in the hallway, and JFK walked up to him and said, "Hey, I'm the president. Nice to meet you. What do you do for NASA?" And his response was, "I'm putting a man on the moon." And even though he was just cleaning, so the reality is everybody was on the same page, and everybody knew that whatever they did, however small or however big, no matter whatever it was all towards the same end goal. That's what's lacking in a lot of organizations today, and people don't realize that no matter what you do in an organization, you're part of the bigger picture. And because of that, people worked more harmoniously together. People were able to get more things done quicker. And it was just a much more focused endeavor. And you had multiple contractors. There were over 400,000 people that worked on this project in the 60s. In fact, based on the census numbers, about 1 out of every 100 to 200 people, depending upon how you look at the census numbers, whether or not you pull the teenagers out and that kind of thing, worked on this project in some way. It was massive. and 10,000 organizations. And so it was a massive endeavor. And for them to accomplish what they did in the short period of time they did it is nothing short of miraculous. I don't think we could do it today. I honestly do not think we could do it today for a lot of reasons, but our government approach is one. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it just, I mean, and it just doesn't seem that a lot of organizations have that type of synergy now.
No, they don't. And that's what existed during that. I mean, you're right. Synergy is a great word because they all worked together, and the whole was greater, in fact, than the sum of its parts. And they learned from their mistakes quicker, and there was less bureaucracy. In fact, when things got bureaucratic in NASA, that's when things took a dive. I was talking to my friend Al Warden. He went to the moon in Apollo 15. He wrote the foreword for the book. We were just talking a couple of weeks ago about this. Because I asked him point blank, when did things start to turn? And he said, well, it was late in the 60s, about 69. Once we had accomplished the first moon landing, once we had done it, that's when things started to turn because, Congress started cutting budgets. And right away, because, hey, we did it, we did our thing, their vision changed, whereas, when it was all about getting there, they were all focused. But the minute we did it, it's like, okay, now the agenda started coming out. Like, well, let's use our monies for other things now. We've already done this. There's nothing more to learn. But the scientific community said, no, there's plenty more to learn. Just because we got there doesn't mean we haven't learned anything yet. And which is why the later missions in Apollo, the 15, 16, 17 missions, especially Al's mission was the first and the two after him, were all scientific missions about just to learn what they can. So they spent more time on the moon. They studied the moon from a geologic perspective. They learned a lot more than they ever knew before about it. But that was the end of the program. And when they started cutting budgets, everybody started covering their own butts. Everybody started, contracting into their own little silos, and things started bogging down. An example would be, Al being a pilot. He used to be a former, he's a West Point grad, and he was an instructor at the Air Force test pilot school. Back when they were in astronaut training, and back then the astronauts, the pilots, basically of the spacecraft, were working hand in hand with the engineers and all the contractors to develop this stuff. And so he had to fly a lot from from Kennedy Space Center to Houston, where Mission Control was, out to the West Coast in California, where North American was, who was building the command module that he was working on. He was flying back and forth. So a lot of the astronauts had easy access to like a T-38, which is a small trainer plane for the Air Force. Mm-hmm. But they had T-38s assigned to NASA, and they could just call him and say, "Hey, I have to go out to California. Great, we'll have your plane ready in 15 minutes." And he just pop in and fly off and go. Well, towards the end, he said, "Oh, that changed tremendously. I have to call days or even, a week ahead and say my plan is to be there, and have to go with all this paperwork." And it got really bureaucratic, and it bogged everything down. That's just one example, but he said there were tons of examples like that where everything got slower, more kind of like murky in the mud, and it just took so much more effort just to get a simple thing done. And that's what started killing NASA at that point. They lost that freedom and flexibility of accomplishing goals and tasks.
Oh, that's too bad. Really, it's too bad. I mean, we talk about hindering, innovation. How's technology doing that?
Well, I think technology is good and just as equally evil. So, and I'm a technology guy. I like technology, but there are certain things I have learned are just not good for me. And everybody bemoans, like millennials today, about how they're not focused and how they just can't keep focused on a task for very long. And they're all reactionary, and they're all on their little smartphones walking around. They can't engage with people socially anymore because it's all about social media and all these different things. And some of that's true. No question about it. I see it every day. But on the flip side of this, the technology is a massive tool that can be used in incredible ways. Where I would like to see technology, the focus on technology being is not part of necessarily life, but more part is just taking it back to as a tool aspect. Case in point, I have tried, this is a personal story, but I have tried, I use my smartphone and my iPad for everything. However, I have tried to use it for like planning my tasks I have to accomplish in a given day, because I'm very task and goal oriented. So especially if you're writing, I mean, you have to force yourself to write. Writing that's the biggest key to writing, is just forcing yourself to do it. And for me to stay on task, I have to see my tasks in front of me all day. They have to guilt me into doing them. And knowing that unless I can get these things done, I have not had a successful day. If I've got to peck around on my smartphone or my iPad looking for tasks to do, or my schedule for the day, those types of things, it's just not going to happen. So I still use a paper planner. I tried to use my technology for those types of things, but it was, for me personally, very ineffective. So for tasks and planning, I use a paper planner still, which I'm not the only one, because planner sales are very high still, and Filofax still sells a lot of these things every year and things. So I'm old school in that regard. But I find that technology is very good from a communication standpoint, as long as it doesn't overrun your life. In other words, I turn my notifications off, and so I can look at my phone when I want to look at my phone, and not because my phone tells me to. And people have become somewhat subservient to their smartphones and their technology, and that's where it starts getting bad, when it starts to run you versus you running it. It's kind of like artificial intelligence. There's a lot of artificial intelligence now being built into our technology. People don't realize it, but like when you walk to your car and you look down at your smartphone and it says, hey, it's only a 15-minute drive home, like, how does it know I'm going home? Well, because through artificial intelligence, your smartphone through the cloud has studied your habits, whether you're realizing it or not. It knows that about this time every day, you're heading home. And it knows that because it knows where your starting point is and it knows where your ending point is. And because it tracks your locations. I mean, people don't understand any of this that's happening, but it is. And that's all artificial intelligence. There are good and bad things about artificial intelligence. I have a gentleman coming in for our CI week in the spring that we do, who's according to Time Magazine, one of the top 5 smartest people in the world when it comes to artificial intelligence. And he'll tell you that unless we keep our heads about us when it comes to this, and keep focused on in terms of what its benefits are versus its negative side. The concepts of Terminator and the Matrix and stuff, those movies, they're not out of the realm of reality. That could very easily happen, where the machines get smarter than the humans, and that's scary. So you've got to kind of keep on top of the fact that this is a tool. It's not. You should be using it for how you want to use it, and it should not be telling you how to live your life.
Yeah. Well, and you touched on this, and I'd love for you to share with our listeners CI Week. What's that all about?
Okay, well, every year, the college I run, I decided that, we spent a lot of time talking about how we use technology. And when we built this college, we did a lot of things that were brand new. I mean, nobody was doing these things at the time, like using handheld technology. At that time, it was Palm Pilots and compact PCs, pocket PCs, to deliver course content and wireless networks, and using e-content. All that was brand new. Nobody was doing that. We couldn't even get e-content from the publishers at that time because they were so worried about what was happening with Napster and stealing music that they wouldn't allow us to have access to their content, digitally. So we had to have all that stuff written for us by our own faculty members. Had to write their own books, basically their own e-books, and we made some huge inroads in this side. But then I realized, about 5 years after starting that it's probably more important that we help students and help them become better thinkers, and help train them to become better thinkers and more creative in their thinking and more imaginative. So that's when we started to take a step back and think about our learning environment, and that sometimes maybe it's good to take a pause from the grind of the educational process. And if you've been to college, it's a grind. Every semester is a grind, and at some point it's good to have those breaks, which is why spring break exists, for example. So once a year in the spring, because usually in an academic year, the fall's easier, because the spring, after you've had 2 consecutive semesters out of summer break, the spring gets even more of a grind, a bigger, laborious type of process. So we take a week off, and we suspend classes, and we bring in about anywhere from 12 to 15 speakers from all over the place to come in, and we do like a little mini TED conference. And they'll do like an hour-long keynote, and the students and the general community, anybody's invited to this, and it's free. It doesn't cost a dime because it's all sponsor paid for. Can interact with these people and meet them and talk to them firsthand. So like over the years, we've had Steve Wozniak, co-founder of Apple. We've had Damon John, who's on Shark Tank. We've had people who've been to the Titanic and explored the Titanic, to a number of the men who've been on the moon, to celebrities like from Star Trek, and I mean, you name it. We've had all kinds of people over the years, and we have a great group coming next year, a fantastic group. So if you're interested in seeing who that is and want to participate, like I said, it's free, no cost whatsoever. Microsoft is the presenting sponsor for it, and the website for that is CI for Celebrate Innovation, CIWeekExperience.com. It's all there.
Well, I'll be checking that out for sure. It sounds very exciting, and the past guests that you've had, my goodness, they're astounding.
Yeah, well, next spring we have, if you ever watch Travel Channel and you've seen the show Expedition Unknown with Josh Gates, Josh is a very funny archaeologist. He's kind of along the lines of Indiana Jones. Mm-hmm. And a young guy, travels all over the world, does some of the most bizarre things, trying to prove something or find something. Or in one episode, he's being lowered in a shaft about the size of a barrel, 50 yards down below the city of Jerusalem, trying to follow a hunch on where the Ark of the Covenant might be. The next episode, he's riding horseback up in northern Siberia looking for deep frozen woolly mammoth tusks, because there's a company down in South Korea that wants to clone one. Why, I don't know. But, I mean, we know nothing about their ecosystem, so all we're going to do is end up killing them off again, probably. But,
yeah, that doesn't sound good.
Yeah, I know. So
there's a reason they're not here anymore.
Yeah, there's a reason. So he's all over the world and doing this kind of stuff. He's very, very interesting, very funny guy. So he'll be here speaking. We have Jonathan Frakes, who is Commander Riker on Star Trek Next Generation. He's a director and a producer, and he does all kinds of things, both in the sci-fi and not sci-fi worlds. Jill Heinert. Jill is Canadian, but she is one of the top water divers in the world. In fact, she's won awards that only like Jacques Cousteau and Bob Ballard and people like that have won. She does some amazing things. She's coming. I've got David Gallo coming back. Dr. Gallo is led numerous missions back to the Titanic. He found the Air France plane that crashed in the Atlantic a number of years ago. Now he's been put in charge of the Malaysian plane search, because they can't find it, and he's good at finding things. So he's coming. Again, a whole slate of people. So we have 14. We have Rob Manning. Rob has designed all of the Mars rovers, and he leads those efforts out of JPL, the Jet Propulsion Labs in California. He's coming to speak. Natalia Holt, who wrote the book Rise of the Rocket Girls. If you saw the movie Hidden Figures last year. Yeah, yep. So there were two groups of women during the 50s that were doing the human computing type thing. There was the women that the movie Hidden Figures focused on in the manned space program out in Langley, Virginia. And then you had a similar group of women out in California at the Jet Propulsion Labs that were doing all the hand trajectory and mathematics for the probes that we sent out to like Jupiter and Mars and Voyager, for example, and Magellan and Viking and Mariner and all those probes we sent out to other planets. They did all that by hand out there as well. So that book is about them. Again, a great slate of people coming.
It sounds like such a great lineup, and my goodness, what a great opportunity to kind of connect and just be inspired, because we need more inspired people in this world. And
that's the whole purpose of it.
Oh, of course. And to kind of toggle back over to your book, I mean, you talk about passion, and we talked about this earlier. How does this play a part in all of that?
Well, again, like I said before, I'm a true believer that if you're following your passion, you will never work a day in your life. You would just love life because you're doing what you love, and that's what passion is. Passion is where your interests lie. It's where your loves lie. It's what drives you as a human being. And like I said, I'm passionate about inspiring people. So everything I do in my life is to inspire somebody to become a better version of themselves. So whether I'm writing books, whether I'm doing my own podcast, or whether I'm blogging, or whether I'm doing events like CI Week, or whatever the case it is, it's but the sole purpose is just trying to inspire people, of all ages, young or old, to just take a step forward, and step up their game a little bit, raise their bar, push themselves to a higher level in an area where they are passionate about. So that's where passion comes into play for me. I'm driven by. I've seen too many people struggle through life, especially if you're in a college environment. You see a lot of that, and it's sad when they don't have to be. You know, as long as you're willing to take a pause and start to follow those passions they have, because everybody's got passions within. They just got to pull them out.
Yeah. Well, and you know, when I worked in my corporate world before, part of my job was doing presentations to groups of people, and one of the questions I'd ask is how many people loved the work that they did, and very few people would raise their hand. And I always felt that to be very sad, because, you know, you want people to enjoy what they're doing. Otherwise, you know, it shows in the work, and then we've got companies that aren't working well together, and it just spirals out of control from there.
Yeah, you're very right. I mean, and that's where my passion lies, how people find those passions, because you're right. If people aren't happy in the job, it shows its head in all kinds of areas. You know, the customer service side, the quality side. If people are, which is why I'm convinced we got to the moon in 8 years, because people were passionate about it. If they weren't, we would have never got there.
It was kind of a miracle and a prayer that happened. You know? And
right.
I'm sure you probably feel that way talking with all the great people that you know that were personally involved in that.
Oh, yeah, and they have taught me a lot about passion, just because they were all passionate. They still are. I mean, it's funny, Al Warden, he turns 86 here in about 2 months. You would never know he was 86 years old. I mean, he's a very active guy. He probably acts like he's 60. And I've never seen a guy with as much energy as him, and he's very passionate about helping young people. He's very gracious with his time. When I had him here in Des Moines last March, he was willing to go sit in a half a dozen elementary schools and talk to young kids, and he's very, very passionate about what he does and what he did, but more so about helping others see their dreams come true as well.
Yeah, and move forward. Well, and I think I have time for, I've got dozens of questions here to ask you, of course, but I think I have time for one more. And so, you know, during all of the research that you did for your book and just your journeys, what would be one of the more surprising things that you discovered?
Well, probably the most surprising thing to me today, but it goes hand in hand with passion, is and what's kind of a little disturbing to me, a little distressing, I guess, is the declining amount of work ethic. Studies are showing this as well. That people aren't willing to work as hard as maybe past generations did for the same outcome. And some of it, again, I hate making generalizations across the board, because for every person I see that's not working very hard, I see one that is. So I'm not trying to overly generalize here, but I will say that I've seen it happen over time, declines in work ethic. One story I give in my book is, as a college professor, and I taught for 25 years. Since day one of all the classes I ever taught, I gave my students a chance to write an extra credit research paper, because sometimes students don't do well on exams. They have test anxiety. They might freeze during the exam, or they knew the material, they just didn't do well on the test. And it happens all the time. Test taking is a whole psychological process as well. So I gave them that chance to say, you can write a paper. And I gave them all the constraints in the syllabus, and they had deadlines and so on and so forth. And when I started doing this, I guess it'd be about 30 years ago, in a class of, say, 40, I'd have 38 papers turned in, whether they needed them or not. And, you know, A students are turning them in. People wanted to guarantee a higher grade, because it was worth up to a 10% bump in your grade, which is a full letter grade. And so I got 38 out of 40 turned in. I mean, it was like clockwork every class. Over the years, that steadily declined. And then by the time I taught my last class a couple of years ago, in a class of 60, I had 0 turned in. In fact, I had 0 turned in my last 4 or 5 semesters.
Really?
And,
wow.
Oh yeah, really. And then they would call me and complain about their grade, you know, after they were posted, and didn't understand why their grade was as low as they thought it was. And that's just one anecdotal piece of evidence that I've seen in life around me, that there is, you know, despite the studies that are out there, the third-party studies, my own anecdotal research and my own life experience is supporting it. It's just showing that there's been a decrease in willingness to do above and beyond to achieve a goal that you might have. So that's kind of a problem, for me that we had to change. And I think if I can help inspire people to higher levels of passion, that will fix itself real quick. If people are doing that, what you're passionate about, they won't be able to help themselves from working hard towards it because that's what their life's going to do. Yeah, right.
Yeah, because it's all fun. It's all play.
Yeah, it's all play. See, my dad taught me a lesson when I was a kid, and he didn't even realize he was teaching me this lesson. I think my dad was just trying to do something quick because it was faster for him. But most kids, when they're taught how to ride a bicycle, they use training wheels, and it's common. And so they put the training wheels on the bike, and the kids realize that, hey, I'm not going to fall over. So over time they generate this sense of security on the bike because it's being held up by the training wheels. And then if you're a good parent, you're sneaking into the garage at night and you're cranking them up a half an inch at a time. Without the kid knowing it, and then before the kid even realizes it, they're not even using the training wheels at all. They're not even touching the ground. And then you take them off, have a big graduation. Everybody, it's like, oh, yeah, great. Well, my dad, we lived on a hill, and it was it was the kind of pavement back then where they would put down a layer of tar and they put pea-sized gravel all over it, and then the cars over time would smash the gravel into the tar, to kind of create this faux blacktop approach. And the tar, I remember that the hill had just been tarred and gravel, basically fresh. Dad took me to the top of the hill, and he basically put me on my bike and let me go. And I fell down immediately, and he'd pick me up, brush off the tar and gravel and the sticky gravel, and he'd put me on my bike and let me go again. And I realized in a very short period of time that I either had to figure this out quick or I was going to become tarred and graveled all day long. It's going to be very painful. So I was riding my bike. My dad confirmed this, that within about 20 minutes, I was riding my bike on my own, and I was doing just fine. So it was a very expedited approach to teaching a kid how to do something. Now, my dad, I don't know what he was doing with, why he went down this road. He hardly even remembers why he did it himself. But the lesson it taught me was sometimes the best approach to something is just get on the bike and try. Just do it. People overplan sometimes. People overthink things. They process it too much, and that kind of just kills their passion, and they just don't do it then because it's like, all the what ifs come into play, and then some of the laziness comes in. And see, I was just taught to jump on the bike and go, and I have failed a ton of times because of that, but I've also learned from all those. So I'm less afraid now to just do something.
Yeah, I got thrown in the deep end as a kid, so I get it.
I understand that, too. It happened, too. Yep. Throw you in and swim.
Swim. Learn. Yeah, I get that. So, well, gosh, this has been such a great time. I've had such a great time with you, Dr. Tony. Where can people connect with you and be part of your community?
Well, the easiest way, if you go to my website, which it's very easy because right now the title of my book takes you there. So if you just go to quartermillionsteps.com, you can connect with me through LinkedIn and Facebook there, or you can follow me on Twitter, which is also through my website too. All those things are through my website, and you can all my content's out there that I provide, and access to my blogs and podcasts and things are all there as well. So that's the easiest way, just quartermillionsteps.com.
Well, and I've actually purchased a couple of your books as gifts and highly suggest that people do as well, A Quarter Million Steps. It's worth getting. It's just a great holiday gift for those special people who are looking to move their life in a new direction with passion and creativity. So, Dr. Tony, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Well, thank you for having me. I will say, too, my book obviously was released nationally in October. And so, yes, you can get it through Amazon. Yes, you can get it through Barnes & Noble. But I'll tell you, if you get through the website I just gave you, quartermillionsteps.com, it's the same price. But that book also comes signed by Apollo 15 astronaut Al Worden, which, having been to a number of events with him, all the Apollo astronauts now, when they go to signing events, they charge anywhere from $150 and up for their signature, which is not uncommon at all. Some are as high as some of these astronauts are charging $600 to $1,200 a pop because they're getting older and they're dying off. So But Al was gracious enough to pre-sign a ton of books. Limited supply, obviously, but he signed a number of copies ahead. So if you order from the website, it comes signed by him as well, and which makes it even more special because you're basically getting the book's already worth a lot more just by getting it than what you paid for it. So.
Well, both of you signed it, correct? Because I could have sworn I saw your signature on it too.
Oh, I signed it. Yes, I do sign it myself. Of course.
You got to have the author's signature. Come on.
Right, yeah, it comes signed by both of us. Okay, I'll throw that in there. Just kind of signed by both of us. But if you buy it through your Barnes & Noble out there or Amazon, it won't come signed by anybody. So.
Yeah.
Same price. That's the deal of the century right there.
It really is. I mean, my goodness, it's not an opportunity someone gets every day. So I'm so glad you shared that with us, and that's an impressive gift.
Well, that's the end of our time today. Thank you so much, Dr. Tony, for sharing not only your wisdom and insight with us, but your brand new book, 250,000 Steps. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in today. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.